Nobody likes traffic jams, being put on hold, having to stand in a line, or watching files download. It is irritating. From microwaves to fast food restaurants to high-speed internet, solid-state drives, streaming video, and digital downloads, instant gratification has become big business. We have just come to expect it. And even though things happen at a much faster rate nowadays, it seems that we are more impatient than ever. Now, the Bible warns us that there is a price that we pay for impatience. But in the same way, the Apostle Paul also points out that patience is possible. Patience is a virtue. Patience is a fruit of the Spirit, which means that patience is actually a sign of spiritual maturity. Why is patience so important? And how do we actually become more patient people? This week, as we continue our Believe series on learning how to think and how to live, how to become more and more like Jesus, this weekend I think we're turning to a really important topic that is something we all struggle with, and that is the topic of patience. Now, the New Testament word for patience, it's a Greek word, macrothumia. Macrothumia. It sounds like a skin disease, doesn't it? It's like you turn on TV and it's like, do you suffer from macrothumia? Are you embarrassed by the painful itching that, we have Relieve It. Talk to your doctor about it. Macrothumia is not a skin disease. It's actually something that you want to have. It's made up of two words. The words taken together mean slow to get angry. You know how we have this phrase in the English language called short-tempered? If we had a phrase that meant long-tempered, it would literally be macrothumia. That's exactly what it means. It takes a really long time to become upset. And macrothumia actually has positive health benefits. And this has been shown to be the case. Research has demonstrated that impatience causes stress. We know this, right? Which weakens our immune system, irritates our stomachs, raises our blood pressure, strains our hearts. And not only does it have those physiological kind of impacts on us, it also, when we are stressed and feeling impatient, it actually increases the risk that we're going to commit errors or be involved in accidents. Isn't that crazy? What is the payoff for patience, on the other hand? Well, patience, for one thing, lowers stress. That's obvious, isn't it? If impatience increases it, patience lowers stress. And that has clear health benefits for us. That's why James advises, among other reasons, he advises, be patient then, brothers and sisters. Be patient. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and the spring rains. There are just a lot of things in life that we can't control, like the weather. In those situations, impatience doesn't help, doesn't add a thing to our lives. As a matter of fact, if anything, it just makes matters worse. So patience just has this wonderful ability for us, if we can figure out how to become more patient. It lowers stress. Now, in addition to that, it also reduces regret. Have you ever done something or said something when you're impatient with another person or a situation, and afterwards you go, man, I wish I had not done that, or I wish I hadn't said that? Well, the book of Proverbs tells us in today's key verse that whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. It's reminding us that being patient is a sign of wisdom. I mean, it is just the smart thing to do. While having a short fuse, being impatient, is basically dumb. It's short-sighted. It's self-destructive. It can cause us to say and do things that we regret. The truth is, and here's why, it's because our initial responses or initial reactions to people and situations are not always the wisest or the most godly reactions. Impatience, of course, shows itself in other ways apart from anger and having a short fuse. We can show impatience, for instance, when we try to get ahead of God. Anybody here ever done that? Think about the story. This is a well-known story in the Old Testament, the story of Abraham and Sarah. God had promised them that they were going to be the ancestors of a great nation through whom all the nations of the world would be blessed. Now, they're senior citizens at this point. Sarah's well beyond childbearing years and so on. Actually, when she hears it, she's overhearing this conversation in a tent, and she hears it and just starts laughing. And the angel of the Lord says, "Why did you laugh?" She goes, "I didn't laugh," but she had. But God had promised that they would be ancestors of this great nation through whom all the nations of the world would be blessed. But after a couple of decades of waiting, they got impatient. See, we get impatient after 1 minute of, whatever. After a couple of decades, they grew impatient. So Sarah comes up with this great plan for Abraham. What her plan is, Abraham, why don't you sleep with my servant Hagar, and then we will raise her child as our own. It's like, what could possibly go wrong with that? Well, you read the story and you find out it just, talk about a dysfunctional family. There's all this, conflict and bitterness and jealousy and all that. And that was just then, but there are repercussions. We're dealing with the offspring of the, descendants of Sarah and Hagar. All the conflict in the Middle East right now is basically conflict between their two descendants. These two family lines. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with being impatient? So patience lowers stress. It reduces regret. And then really positive thing, patience just works wonders in relationships. We're patient with one another. It is absolutely amazing what can happen. The Bible says a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. If you're having conflict in a marriage or with your kids or whatever, one of the best things that you could do is learn how to be patient. It's hard, right? But it is. See, here's the deal. There is always going to be some conflict in any relationship, no matter how solid, no matter how good, no matter how healthy it is, no matter how much people love one another, there is going to be conflict in the relationship. Because we're fallen people, we live in a fallen world. Each one of us, we go through life seeing everything from our own perspective and in light of our own experience and all that kind of stuff. So obviously there's going to be conflict in even the healthiest of relationships. But what patience does is patience helps us make allowances for one another so that those occasional inevitable conflicts and disagreements, they're just a part of life. When they happen, they don't escalate into something destructive. A lot of times marriages, come to a sad end because people made a choice at some point. I've lost patience, given up on this. I can't deal with it anymore. Patience, whether it's with a spouse, our children, our parents, co-workers, whatever, patience just helps life work more smoothly. I really like the way Chris Evans describes it in a little book he calls Fruit at Work. He says, don't try this at home, but can you imagine what would happen if you drained all the oil out of your car and then drove it around for a day? You know what would happen, right? Even though the parts of your car have been designed to fit together, they can't fit perfectly. Without something to keep the parts from grating on each other, the engine would soon overheat, it would seize up, and it would just stop working. That's what happens to marriages and families and friendships. It's what happens in offices and in classrooms when people lack patience with one another. God's designed us so that we're best when we're working together, but But for whatever reasons, there's going to be some friction and so on, and we have to deal with that friction because otherwise people are going to start to grate on each other, and it is just a matter of time before things overheat. This is the source of the arguments that we have. So patience lowers stress. It reduces regret. It does work wonders in relationships. It's like the oil that keeps things from overheating. And actually, I could go on. There are a lot more benefits of patience, but I know you might not have the patience to hear them all. So let's just move on. And because I think the real question we all have is, okay, yeah, I get that. Patience would be great. I wish my spouse had more, but, just kidding. But what is the path to patience? How do we get there? Once again, the key is remembering that patience, according to the Bible, patience is a fruit of the Spirit. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that it doesn't grow overnight. It's not like Jack and the Beanstalk. It just grows. Patience is something that develops over time. And as a fruit of the Spirit, it doesn't come from us ramping up on ourselves and trying harder. I got to be more patient. I got to be more patient. Because when we start thinking that way and talking to ourselves that way, that's actually a sign of our impatience. Kind of a paradox, right? It's a dilemma. So what do? Was a fruit of the Spirit, just a reminder, as a fruit of the Spirit, it means that patience is a gift from God that comes from abiding in Christ. Remember, Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you abide in me, if you remain in me, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me, you can do nothing. So the key to our developing patience is actually being in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ and allowing the Holy Spirit to work in us to help us to become more Christ-like people. Now that sounds really passive. Is there anything that I can actually do now that can contribute to my becoming a more patient person? Or do I just have to patiently wait for God to fix me? There is something that you can do. There are actually a couple of things that you can do. The first one is, and I think that this really helps us to develop patience. The first thing is that I can do is to recognize and to give thanks to God for being patient with me. To recognize that God has been really patient with me my whole life, and just to thank Him for that. The Bible says in Psalm 103, and by the way, it says this in a lot of other places as well, the Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. God's been patient with you your entire life. And by the way, unless you're perfect right now, God's still being patient with you. I know He's being patient with me. I came across a blog a little while back where somebody had written this question, or this piece. I really liked it. It says, why, it's sort of put in the form of a prayer, why do you put up with my foolishness, Lord? Why are you so patient with me? 1 minute I'm praising you, the next minute I'm grumbling. 1 minute I'm kind to other people, the next minute I just hurry past somebody in need. 1 minute I promise that I'm going to honor you, the next minute I'm seeking glory for myself. What a mess. Seriously? Who could live with a person like that? Let alone forgive them. Let alone love them. It's a good question, right? See how patient God is with us? I think once we recognize, gosh, God has been patient with us, you know what it does? It makes us a little more sensitive, and maybe helps expand our perspective enough so we can go, gosh, if God's been patient with me that way, maybe I can be a little more patient with other people. It's a first step. I think a second step on the path to patience, and I don't know if you're going to like this one or not. Not that that's what this is about, but I think the Bible really teaches this. I think a second step on the path to patience is for us to learn to accept personal responsibility for our impatience. You know what I'm saying here? For us to accept personal responsibility for our own impatience. Because here's the deal. For most of us, you know what our go-to position is? You know what our autopilot is? Our autopilot is set on blaming other people for our impatience. You know, if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be impatient. They're the ones that are taking too much time. They're the ones that are talking too much. They're the ones who are driving too slow. They're the ones who cut me off. They're the ones who are being rude. Bottom line is, it's their fault that I'm impatient. And this is fascinating, there are other times, you know, maybe we're on vacation or whatever the reason is, exactly the same thing happens to us, and we're just more philosophical and laid back about the very same thing. Which suggests to me that patience has to be something of a choice. Has to be something of a choice. It's really easy for us to blame others when we find ourselves becoming impatient. But I think we have to acknowledge that blaming other people not only reinforces, but it actually ratchets up our impatience by casting us in the role of victims. And this point, by the way, is biblical. I think this is exactly the point when James calls that whole thing into question, when he poses this question and then answers it. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? Conflict around us, he is saying, is actually a result of desires battling within us. When we catch ourselves growing impatient with someone or some situation, rather than fix the blame on them, what would happen if we admitted and accepted responsibility for our lack of patience? Just owned it. Yep, I'm being impatient, and I could blame them for it, but this is something going on in my heart. No, that's not easy. It's not easy. Because when we get impatient, we get all wound up. And actually, frankly, when we get impatient, I think we become sort of irrational. But it's amazing how David models this, though, that kind of a different way of doing it. When he prays in Psalm 139, this is a beautiful psalm, he says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." It's hard to hear. Sometimes I want to leave and go someplace. I have to wait for somebody. I grow impatient, and it would be really easy to say, why aren't they ready? It's all their fault and everything. But there's a part of it is, why am I getting so bent out of shape about this? Accept personal responsibility. A third step on the path to patience, and this is a super important one. And I would imagine that you'd expect me to say this, but it is so key. A really important piece of learning how to become more patient is just learning to trust God and trust God's plan and trust God's perfect timing. There's a reason that the Bible tells us, and not just once, at like a lot of different times, the Bible tells us to wait for the Lord. I love this verse. Wait, it's twice. Wait for the Lord. Be strong. Let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Notice how it ties waiting in with what's going on in your heart, by the way. Wait for the Lord. With the prophet Isaiah even promising that those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. When we wait for the Lord, it's got these incredible benefits. But as we saw with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and that whole messed up situation, and by the way, there are lots of other biblical as well as contemporary examples of this. We're not especially good at waiting. Would you agree with this? Just a quick show of hands. Who here is really excellent with waiting? You're really good at waiting. I'm not seeing any hands. So, yeah, that makes the point. But here's the deal, though. We're not very good at waiting, but one of the secrets to success in life, not only is this a sign of spirit, is patience a sign of spiritual maturity because it's a fruit of the Spirit. One of the secrets to success in life is learning to be patient. It's learning to delay gratification. It's learning to trust God and God's plan and God's perfect timing, and then kind of letting go of the rest of it. And that plays itself out in all kinds of different ways that have incredibly practical implications for our lives. You want to know how you can be successful in your finances? Wait until you can afford it before you can buy it, before you buy it. Does that make sense? You just heard half of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. The half everybody ignores. Wait until you can afford it before you buy it. And by the way, just because you can afford it doesn't mean you should buy it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Wait until you have thought it through before you say it. Wait until you have the facts that you need before you come to a conclusion. Wait for the Lord. Wait. One final thing, and for me this is super important. If you guys don't get anything else out of today's message, I really hope that you'll get this. When you find yourself getting impatient with someone, don't pray for more patience. Now, I know a lot of you think that you know where I'm going to go with this from this point on, but I don't think you do. Because I think where some of you think I'm going with this is we've joked a lot in the past about how if you pray for patience, what's going to happen is God's going to put you in a situation where you have to show patience, right? Pray for patience this week and you will end up at the DMV or whatever. Now the thing is, we do need to pray. When we're feeling impatient, we do need to pray, but what we need to pray for isn't patience. It's something else. You're all thinking, I wonder if it's this. What is that thing? In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this famous love chapter that the Apostle Paul wrote, that's used in wedding ceremonies and stuff, talks about agape love, the perfect kind of unconditional love that God has for us, that we are to have for one another. In that beautiful love chapter, Paul says that love is macrothumia. Love is patient. He says love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. Now there's a lot more. It goes on to say more about what love is, but the part I want to focus on right now is love is patient. When you find yourself growing impatient with somebody, when you find yourself growing impatient with your spouse, or with one of your kids, or one of your friends, or a coworker, gosh, maybe even customer service, whatever. When you find yourself getting upset or frustrated, don't pray for more patience because here's why, as if the problem were all with them. When you say, I need more patience, it just reinforces this idea that we're victims and the problem is all with them. You know what you pray for? Pray for more love. Isn't that amazing? Have you ever thought to do that? Pray for more love. Those of you who know Peg know that I have, at least I believe this, I have a wonderful wife. But like every married couple, there are times when we need to extend some grace to one another. Let me tell you what I do when I get impatient, when I start to feel frustrated about something. I remind myself of just this foundational truth. Whenever I find myself getting impatient with my wife, I say to myself, I love my wife. That's what I do. I love my wife. It's not about me being patient with her as if she were the problem. It is about me loving her and choosing to love her. It's about me loving my wife. And the weird thing is, it works. I've been doing this for decades now. It works. Not that I'm the most, I'm not setting myself as some kind of great model of patience. Believe me, I'm not. But it really helps me because it reframes whatever it is that we happen to be going through at the time. It puts things in a really different, and I think into their proper perspective. And I don't know what she does to put up with me. I need to ask her. But whatever it is, I'm grateful for it because I can guess, and I believe it is no doubt, whatever it is she's doing to be patient with me, it is based on her love for me. I know that. Because when all is said and done, really, the path to patience is love. That's why when the Apostle Paul writes about the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5:22-23, what's he state? Right out of the chute. The fruit of the Spirit is love. It's the first thing he mentions, and all the rest of it, just flows out of that. We don't become more patient by working at being more patient, or by trying harder, or ramping up on ourselves. We become more patient as we grow in love. Love one another. Love is patient. Love is kind.